Cheetos. I am Vanessa Y. Rogers. I am your host of your favorite new podcast, Fabric of Folklore. So when I created this podcast, I really wanted to explore the behind the scenes, if you will, of culture. In this podcast, we don't just see the stage. We throw back the curtains to see the making of what makes a culture culture. We love folktales, music, traditional dances, customs, but it's not enough to discuss the what. We really want to understand the how and the why, too. Understanding the deeper meaning adds richness and purpose. So if this sounds like a podcast that you are interested in subscribing and liking to, please do that right now. And today we have a fantastic guest, and actually she's our very first folk musician, so we're really excited to have her. We would love to have more musicians come on the show. Her name is Michela Musolino. Am I pronouncing that correct? Okay, yes. Good. She's an American-born and raised Sicilian folk musician. She's known for her fiery and passionate interpretations of the music she performs. She comes from a long line of musical women, including her grandmother and her great-grandmother, which I'm sure she'll talk about a little bit later. So welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. This is exciting. And I'm always delighted when I can talk about these traditions because everything I do, all the music I make is always rooted in tradition. And the more or the older I get, the more I do this, the more people get to know about it, the more they want to know what is the foundation behind this music. What are the stories? What is the meaning and what are the traditions? So I'm happy to share that anytime.
Well, can you tell us a little bit about how you got into music making in the first place?
My story is kind of strange in that I came to performing actually late in life and even making music. I was surrounded, I had music in my family. My mom, we had a piano in the house. My mom used to sing and play the piano, but that was kind of her release. That was her way of letting off steam. She just relaxed. That was her. So she didn't try to teach it to me. I tried to absorb it, My dad loved music. My dad was always taking us to concerts, and he always made sure, we had the latest stereo. He loved American country music, and he loved Italian music. So that was kind of thinking of my influences. So we had music in the house. But what was interesting is that as an adult, I got involved with a folk group in New York City, I Giullare di Piazza. And how I started, I'd gone to one of their shows and I was on their mailing list. And they said they're going to start teaching folk dance lessons, Southern Italian folk dance lessons. So I thought, this is great. This is my tradition. I'm going to go learn, And we had, we danced at events in our family. We had our traditional dances, but I didn't realize how traditional they were. I didn't understand at that time because it was just natural to us. It was like part of everyday life. So when I started taking these dance classes, they asked me to audition for their theater company because I looked the way I do and because I understood the dances, because it was easy for me to pick up these dances because there was already a foundation that we did stuff like this at home. And when I started studying this stuff, I went to visit my dad and I said, my mom and dad, I'm at their house, and I said, hey, Pop, you know what? I'm learning how to play the frame drum. This is, I'm taking folk dance classes and we're learning Sicilian frame drumming. And he says to me, well, that's good. I'm glad for you. You should do that. It's good because that's your tradition. That's what women do. I'm like, what are you talking about? And he said, no, it's from the realm of the women. It's women's tradition. And you should drum because your grandma used to drum. It's like, what? And he said, yeah, don't you remember? Grandma used to have a drum hanging on the wall of her house. I'm like, I don't remember this. I was 2 when my grandmother died. I don't remember this. I remember nothing about that particular grandma. And I said, well, I don't know. He said, and your great grandmother was known for her drumming and her dancing. When she was in Sicily, she was known for her drumming and her folk dancing. I'm like, wait a minute. This is like blowing my mind. Like, what are you talking about? And my dad was also kind of, he was very modern, very progressive. He was not one to say, well, women have to do this, men do. He was not like that. He was, very much like, you have the ability, you're going to college. If, we have, because it doesn't matter. And at that time, some men weren't even sending their daughters to school because well, why are you going to go to school? But he's like, no, you need to be educated. I want my daughters to be educated because, even if they just get married and have kids, well, then I'll have educated grandchildren. But you should be educated, So I was like, what are you talking about? Women's tradition and realm of women, like what? He said, no, women drum. And in our culture, women drum. And that kind of started me off on this journey of finding out about what women do and how the drum was involved with women. So what I try to do in my shows, and I find that even the audience wants to know that there's like a hunger. People want to know about their roots. So I try, as much as I can, I try to incorporate these stories and why I'm playing the drum, how it started in antiquity, really, with the priestesses and these rites. A lot of them were fertility rites, these rituals. And through the years, it became something that was done for diversion and for entertainment. And like for March, because it's Women's History Month, I tried to do a lot of folklore traditions pertaining to women and how it pertained to my songs. And the response was like, we want more, we want more. I'm like, well, come to a show, because I'm not starting a podcast. I'm not writing a book. You just come to my shows. I'm a singer. I'm an entertainer. Even a friend of mine's like, you should put this in a book. I'm like, no, let somebody else be an author. Please don't. So that's where I am. It's like, I'd rather just talk about it. And but maybe, who knows what's going to happen. But this has been like a year of podcasts. So I've been sharing a lot of this on this medium, which is really wonderful. And I'm always happy to reach another audience. And because, this is our tradition, whether you're Sicilian or not, even if you're a woman, you're a human, this is your tradition. Yeah. And we should know about it. We should know we should have a basis. And I always say that too. And I get a lot of laughs for this, but you should know where you come from, because that's your foundation. And even if it's something you don't like, well, then it gives you a starting point to run away from it and run towards something. Yeah. But you need to know what happened before. You need to know what was there. And then you decide what I want to bring with me into the present and what I want to change or what I want to leave behind, understanding it was there. It doesn't have to define you, or it can, what do you want to define you? That's the thing, and maybe, you go forward again. Maybe you're going forward because something in your past you didn't like. And you say, I don't want to bring that into the future. But we need to know what was there. Because without it, you're like a ship without a rudder, without a past. So without an understanding of our past.
Did your family talk a lot about their culture, about Sicilian culture? And did you?
Yeah, very much so. My family was great for storytelling.
Oh, that's awesome.
So we knew a lot about our ancestors. And I thought it was really, I really thought that was an Italian thing. I thought it was a Southern Italian thing or a Sicilian thing or a Calabrese thing. I didn't realize until I started doing this and working in this realm that a lot of families didn't share their stories. And that was a surprise to me, because I thought everybody had a family storyteller. I thought, like my mom and her sisters my mom especially, they were really big on documenting the ancestors and, who was born where and, who got married when. Even now, like sometimes I'll say to my daughter, like, God, I wish Grandma was still alive, because I can't remember anybody's birthdays. I never had to. My mother, all we ever did, whose birthday is it this month? Who do we need to send a card? Who do we need to call? Or my mother would just tell us, like, oh, by the way, it's your aunt's birthday this month. It's your godmother's birthday. You better send her, you better go see her. And I don't have that. So I kind of got spoiled with that. But what I say to people too, and this was coming up, in a project, I'm doing a project for the Tennessee Folklife Institute. And one of the participants, one of the folklorists said, listen, if your grandparents are still alive, talk to your grandparents and get some stories from them. And she's 100% right. And talk to your family, talk to your kids. If you have, even if you have just like a favorite uncle or like a fun story or a memory from your childhood, you'd be surprised how much that means to a child. And, I'm constantly talking to my daughter. Sometimes I think I talk too much. I'm constantly talking to my daughter and telling her stories. And sometimes she'll come back to me and say, remember you told me that was so cool. I'm like, really? It wasn't anything out of the ordinary. Yeah. It wasn't so, but to me it wasn't, but to another generation, it was mind blowing. So talk to your kids, whoever's listening, tell your stories. You don't have to be an author. You don't have to have a podcast or put it on, it doesn't necessarily have to go on social media, but your immediate family, your children, talk to them and get the stories, especially if you have any aunts and uncles still alive or older cousins, or you have another generation before you, get their stories, because that's your story. it's that continuum. In Italian, they call it the nastro rosso, the red ribbon, or il filo conduttore, the continuous line. I'm sorry if I'm hitting the mic. But we have there's this continuum of humanity, and those are our stories that hold us
And that's
together.
why I named
And
the
they're
podcast
valuable.
Fabric of Folklore, because it's all about the threads that make up our folklore.
See?
So
Yeah,
that's awesome
that's
that you actually have
beautiful.
that saying in is Sicilian.
That metaphor,
Is
yeah.
Sicilian a dialect of Italian? Is that right?
Sicilian was always, they call it a dialect, but Sicilian was probably the first dialect to be designated as a language. And scholars insist that Sicilian is a language. And there's a movement now to identify most dialects as their own language.
Oh.
So I'm going to just talk about Sicilian
Yes.
for this. The reason why Sicilian was always put first is typically to denote the difference between a language and a dialect. A language should have a very strong tradition of literature. Sicilian does. And in fact, here's one of my favorite little snippets of knowledge here. The sonnet that we know of, the sonnet was invented in Sicily. The structure of the sonnet was invented in Sicily in the court of King Frederick II, Re Federico II. So we're talking like the 12th century, in the 1100s. And that, he had a court of literature. And then also one of the stories, and a lot of Sicilians are proud of this, when Dante was writing the Inferno, he had to make a decision. Do I write it in the Vulgate, which was the Tuscan dialect, or do I write it in Sicilian, because Sicilian was the language of scholars and academia? And he decided to write it in the Vulgate, and that's why Italian is now based on the Tuscan dialect and not Sicilian, because it wasn't a country, but it was, all these city-states that were connected. They were on the Italian peninsula. So that's where the turning point was. But, Sicilian language it's obviously got an influence of so many different languages. You can hear Spanish in it. You can hear Greek, obviously. You can hear Arab in Sicilian. You can hear French in Sicilian. My father, my uncle used to talk in dialect. I'm like, wait a minute, that's French. That's not even, that word got to come from the French. That's not Italian. But Sicilian has certain verb tenses are different in Sicilian. Obviously there's different words that we don't have, and they're not even derivatives from an Italian word. They're completely different. But we also have, Sicilian's pretty interesting in that we talk about verbs. True Sicilian has no future tense.
Interesting.
No future tense. Yeah, and there's a lot of theories about that. One of the theories is that they were so resolved to there was no hope.
Yeah.
There's that attitude, just resolved or whatever the present, that there was no thought for the future. There's also in true Sicilian, and this changes because there's a modern Sicilian that people speak now today as well. But there was no simple past. So when they use the past, the Sicilian uses the past, they use the past absolute, which is a historic tense. And that's typically, when you're learning a language, the past absolute is used for an activity that happened long ago and it's done. It never happens again. And so, for example, if you go to a Sicilian's house and they want to ask you, we say, in the Northeast here, we say, "Geet yet?" Did you eat? Have you eaten? But in Sicily, they would say, "Mangiasti," and that means, "Have you eaten?" "Hai mangiato" would be Italian, but in Sicilian, "Mangiasti" is the historic tense. So when we were kids, we joke around what, did we eat in the 1500s? And what does that mean? What did we eat in 200 years ago? And we don't want to eat. We didn't eat yesterday. What? But it's their structure. It's how the language is structured. So you have, it's funny because past absolute, that's a hard thing to learn. And, some Italians don't learn that, but you would have the farmers up in the mountains using the past absolute perfectly. Right. So it's an interesting structure. And of course there's a modern version of Sicilian.
When Italians and Sicilians speak, is there difficulty? Is it like a British person and American person speaking, or is it
Yeah, but it might even be worse than that. You would hear, many times Italians will say, "Well, when a Sicilian speaks, I don't understand the word they're saying. I have no idea." It can be very difficult. But I have to tell you, as someone who's traveled throughout central Italy, throughout northern Italy, there are some northern dialect. I'm very used to southern Italian, especially dialects from the Campania region around Naples. I'm used to Sicilian. I'm used to Calabrese, and even in Calabria, the dialects in Calabria that were closer to Sicily, they're much more Sicilian sounding. They don't really sound like Calabrese dialect. If you go towards Cosenza and up like the northern part of Calabria, it's a very different dialect. And I worked with a musician from Cosenza, and he's like, when we would do a song that came from Reggio, like it was a song that came from closer to Sicily, he's like, I don't know what the hell they're saying. And I'm like, are you kidding? I said, it's so clear. You can't, but he spoke dialect, but he didn't speak the one that sounded like Sicilian. But some of these northern dialects, like when I first started going up north, I'm like, oh God, they're talking French. This isn't even Italian. Like, what is this? And sometimes when we get out in the country and, it's late at night and everybody's having wine and they start breaking out those old dialects, I don't know what the heck they're saying. I'm like, and I got to really like strain. I'm like, what? Because it's a different language. So it's not just, everybody, it's so obvious that Sicilian's a different language, but you go to different parts of Italy, and it's the same thing where it's a very different sounds, and it's fascinating. It's
so it is not
amazing.
clear in my head. Is Sicily a part of Italy, or is it its own city?
Yes.
Okay.
Sicily is actually one of the regions because Italy is divided into provinces and then regions. So think of it like counties and then states, right? So you'd have the provinces would be like the counties and the regions would be like the states. So Sicily is considered a region. But the problem you have with Sicily is that because it's an island and it's so separate, a lot of what's happening in Italy is not happening in Sicily and vice versa. And there is that sense of isolation because it is an island, because it has its own history. And Italy is also kind of a weird place too, in the sense that it hasn't been a country very long. It's even younger than the United States.
Is it?
We have the Italian Peninsula. Yeah, 1861.
Oh, I had no idea.
That was when it was unified. Before that, because before that, you had city-states. So you had the Italian Peninsula, but, that's why if you talk to like an Italian American, they don't say, like even if their grandparent, their great-great-grandparents, if they're like their fifth or sixth generation, they don't say like, oh yeah, my family's from Italy. They say, oh, well, my family comes from Roccolumera. They'll tell you the town. Right. They'll tell you the exact town. And, it was so isolated. Towns were so... they had to be like isolated, independent because they were city-states, and it was a means of survival. But there was a wonderful sociologist by the name of Max Ascoli. He was he worked around the 1930s, around time of World War II, and he used to talk about one of the things he talked about Italian Americans. He had this beautiful quote, and the quote is, "They became American before they ever understood that they were Italian." And that's because they were immigrating. When you had that great push of immigration from the 1800s into the early 1900s, early 20th century, you had people coming from these little tiny towns. Unification meant nothing to them because it never got there.
Right.
They were still, everything was in their town, and they had to, and sometimes, people would say like, oh, well, Italians were kind of racist, and they were kind of like, the outsider was an outsider. Well, yeah, everybody was an outsider. Mm-hmm. Because that's how you lived, and with good reason, because pretty much if anybody's coming to your town, they were invading. And, if that goes on for like thousands of years, well, that's kind of, what do they call that? There's a word for that. It's like generational now. It's stuck in your genes. Like you're always afraid of an invader. And that generational trauma. But there's also epigenetics, right? Epigenetics, what happens to the mother gets encoded in the children. Right. You can pass trauma on. So that's why, so there's like science behind this now, so that's why, you say to people like, don't be so judgmental, because you don't know what's going on here. And that Italians have been able to get past that in really a time span is very short in the last couple of generations. That's pretty remarkable. And, and I'm sure a lot of ethnicities went through something like that. Because you talk
about Sicilian language not having a future tense because they didn't have hope, and is that what you were talking about?
Well, that's a theory. I don't know if that's true. That's a theory that some people say, because Yeah. Because it was after what happened was history that a lot of people don't realize history is that what they don't know about history is that Sicily and even southern Italy, I mean, it has this idea, there's this impression that northern Italy left the south behind, right? Northern was really well developed. But the reality was quite the opposite. And before the unification, the south of Italy had a lot of advanced development. Sicily was quite advanced. And you had from Naples on down, it was from Naples all the way down to the southern peninsula into Sicily. It was called the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies. And while, yes, there were some places that were impoverished and backwards, you had incredible industry, you had railroads, you had electricity, you had modern lights and electricity, you had industry, you had wealth. The idea for the unification, there's history that says, well, you know what, the North was the Piedmont, the Piedmont region was impoverished, was in debt. They raided the treasury of the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies. They raided the Sicilian treasury because they needed the money. They wanted the gold. And they destroyed the factory. There were factories in the south of Italy. They destroyed the factories. They ripped up railroads, and literally, frog marched people. There's a history what they call the Brigands in southern Italy. And there were brigands before that were very romanticized, but the brigands that when we talk about the Brigands of the late 1800s, those were people that were still fighting, trying to fight this invader that came from the north, and they were trying to save the south. And when they couldn't do that anymore, they said, well, it's not working, we're going to have to immigrate. And that's when you had that mass expulsion, if you will. People were just like vomited out of Sicily and southern Italy into the United States. And unfortunately, they got a bad rap, like, oh, they were uneducated, they had no money. Well, they had just been robbed, pillaged, and plundered inexplicably. Mm-hmm. So there's that, and that's not a history that we hear that often, but that's actually what happened. And then the opposite of that, we have this idea that there's untold wealth in the north. And I remember, I was the first time I ever went to Venice. I was with a musician that I collaborate with, and he had played in Venice many, many times. He actually went to a conservatory near there, and he was telling me the history. And he's like, "You do realize that Venice was quite impoverished?" And I was like, "Wait a minute." I thought there was untold wealth in Venice. He goes, "No, there was quite a bit of poverty in recent centuries." And he said, all throughout the north, like there was incredible amounts of poverty. And to talk about folklore, I was visiting my friend's mom in Foggia, and a bunch of us had gone down to enjoy this beautiful place in southern Italy. And all of them lived up north in Cremona. And we were at my friend's mom's house. And the South is known for its hospitality and its wonderful food. And my friend's mom, her name is Lucia, and she just was like the standard bearer for hospitality and beautiful food. So we're sitting at her table, and somebody made a comment about this north-south thing, because although they were from the north, they were with somebody who had ties to the south, and all our friends were there who had all like immigrated from the south up to north to work, but their hearts were down in the south. They come home, and Lucia made this comment, and you have to be a student of history to understand, but we all got it. And the next day I said to her, Lucia, you're going to repeat that for me. I'm going to write that down because it was beautiful. And the comment was, in English, I'm going to say it. While we were in the South seated at the banquet at the table of King Frederick II, you people in the North were still on your knees in the swamps, starving.
Wow.
And she said it very elegant. It's beautiful in Italian. The way she said it, quando noi eravamo seduti alla tavola di Re Federico II, voi al nord eravate in ginocchio nelle palafitte. And the image is like, wow. And we all got it. And everybody kind of just stood there and said, wow. And she didn't say it with malice. I mean, I'm saying it with a little bit of, she said it very elegantly, and she was right. That was the history. There was, and we don't hear that. And, I visit universities a lot, and I love to use folklore as a means to inspire learning and history as well. And that's all tied in. And one of the things I mentioned to, university students, especially because they're very disconnected. Our youngest generations now seem to be very disconnected from the past. And that's a mistake we're making. We shouldn't allow that. We should help them to connect to the past. So I say, if you think about it, in the grand scheme of things, on the timeline of human history, we're so affluent. we're so affluent. Even the people that really don't have much today, compared to maybe, what people had 50 years ago, 75 years ago, 100 years ago, we're like light years ahead of anybody. And we take it for granted. We have this, we have everything here. But, there was a time not that long ago, people didn't have a phone in their house.
Right. Yeah.
So, you didn't have a car, you didn't have a phone in your house. You didn't buy everything in a package wrapped in plastic. You wanted bread, you made it, or you walked to the baker, and you only walked to the baker on certain days because the baker didn't have bread every day. And you think about it, and I remember when I was a kid, like our parents would say, don't you appreciate the house you're living in? When I grew up, it was a cold water flat. We had 5 people in one bedroom. We had, this, that, and the other thing. We were in the country. We had to sleep under newspapers when it got cold. And we're like, yeah, sure. But boy, you start to appreciate it. One time, all you need is your power to go out once. You're like, now I get it. Now I get what they face every day, right?
Definitely. So
I get what they face every day.
Do you know how the story of your family, how they immigrated to America and why?
Yes. We had my mom's family was a little different. My dad's family was the story of the contadini, the farmers. My mom's family was a little different in that her family had wealth. And the idea was they were going to come and start businesses here. And they had brothers, they had farms, they grew lemons and oranges. Agrumi, they were lemons. So the idea was somebody was going to go to England. Somebody's going to go to New York. Somebody's going to go to California. So they went to England, they got to New York, and that's where it stopped. And part of the problem was the crops. There was a problem with the crops. And we had a couple years of really bad crops. So it kind of financially destroyed everybody. So here, my mom's family, they became stonemasons. And my dad's family was a little different. They were the farmers and we'd say the contadini, peasants, as you say, they work the land. And I feel bad that there's sometimes a negative connotation with the word peasant. But when I hear the word peasant, I think of a noble person that works they live in the country, they work the land. My dad, his father, quite simply, times were tough. He needed to work, and he knew he could come to the U.S. He left Calabria. He would come to the U.S. He could work in the coal mines. So he left his family, did what they all did, sent money back. And my dad's mom, her family, it was, similar, like it was rough. They couldn't survive. So they said, let's come here. And my dad's, my grandma's family, my dad's mom, they actually came without her because she was not very healthy. She was kind of sickly. She was a little weak. So they were afraid that either she wouldn't make the voyage, or if she did make the voyage and she was sick, they would send her back. And they said, we can't put this kid through that. And we can't, if we leave her in Sicily, we know she's safe. So they came for a little bit. And then she stayed with her aunt in Sicily. And this aunt was a really special lady in that she knew that the opportunity was in the United States. So she worked to make sure that not just my grandmother eventually came to the U.S., but her cousins came too. And little by little, she sent most of the family to the U.S. We still have branches that a lot of in that family in Sicily, because when things started to get better, they were able to stay and survive. But we credit a lot of this with really like setting the ball in motion for our family. And then when my grandma did come over, she was with another aunt who was like a guardian, and she made the trip with these. When she would send the cousin up, she made the trip with them because they didn't want the young girls to travel alone. So we were fortunate that she had a chaperone. And so when she came over, the story is, she was a young woman, she was a teenager, and because she had lived with this aunt, she was, the aunt treated her really well. So she was spoiled. I don't know how spoiled you can be back then, but she started working right away. So she felt like she wasn't their child anymore. And even though she was with her family, she wasn't their child anymore. She considered herself quite independent. And that was a little bit of friction with her family because, you're here, you're in that culture, you still have to be part of that and be, be an underling, I guess, or how you say, or still obey the rules. But she's like, I'm working. I was away from you people these years. I was, doing this and doing that already. So it wasn't an easy situation for my grandma to work within the confines. But they went through it. They just did it.
And where did they settle? Did they settle with other Sicilians as well?
Oh yeah, my grandmother, my dad's mom, went to a town in New Jersey called Elizabeth, New Jersey, and pretty much she was from the town of Ribera in the Provincia di Agrigento in Sicily. Pretty much everybody that comes from Ribera comes through Elizabeth, New Jersey. In fact, I was just talking to a Sicilian filmmaker who lives in Elizabeth, New Jersey, and I was telling him this. I'm like, you do really? He's like, it's all Colombians now. He goes, and he moved there because he's like, I needed the warmth of Southerners, so I felt really at home with these Colombians. I'm like, well, there's a reason that you feel so at home in Elizabeth. Besides the Colombians, I was telling him that once upon a time the immigrant group there were Sicilians. He's like, I didn't know this. And my mom's family went to Newark, and Newark was also a big settlement for all immigrants came through Newark. Newark at one time was like this beautiful metropolis. It was a thriving city, but it had jobs. That's another thing too. They went where they had jobs. So her family has very strong ties to Newark, New Jersey. Most people do. Most people coming through New Jersey have some kind of connection. There was some kind of stop, either like with Newark, Elizabeth, Jersey cities, one of the big cities. You had to go to a big city. That's where the work was. It was
fascinating.
Quite simply.
So let's go back to your music. So you joined a theater troupe, and then how did you really get into music making?
Because I wanted to catch up to everybody. It was really strange because I had always been interested in performing. I was kind of on the fringes of it. I was fascinating me, but having a strict Italian American father and coming from that tradition, it wasn't something that you did. They might have really enjoyed entertainers and live music and theater and movies, and especially they were very supportive of Italian Americans. The famous ones are like, yeah, there are people, a credit to their race or whatever. But you didn't do that. We don't do that. That's not what we are. We don't have those kind of people in our family. So there was that in my head. Yeah. And what happened was I started working with this theater troupe, and I'll never forget the first production we did was this big production in New York City at the Cathedral of St. John the Divine. And there were all these musicians in it, and they were all professional musicians. I mean, I'm an adult. This is how stupid I am. I was an adult, and all these professional musicians that were living in New York City and raising kids and sending their children to college and living, and they made a living with music. And I was like, you can do that? Like regular, they're not super famous that we see their name on a billboard for a movie. They're like regular people can do what? That's how stupid I was. And
I think
and isolated.
I think that is a normal concept because we only think that famous people really make money and everyone else just is a starving artist. So I don't think that is that's a very normal concept, I think, to have.
So those people kind of spurred me on, to do this more. And I started studying, and I started finding teachers to teach me things like Commedia dell'arte. I was studying wonderful teachers from Rome, and one of them is still my friend. The other one would be my friend, but she passed away. One of them is still a dear friend of mine. And I started studying voice and music, and I felt like I had to catch up because I would do these things in New York City. I'd do these workshops, or I'd go to auditions, and everybody around me was young enough to be my kid. And they're brilliant. They're just these amazing artists. They're coming out of college. I studied this. I did wow. I wasn't doing that when I was in college. So I just felt like I always have to catch up. To this day, I'll sit down, I have to learn things, and I'm like, God, everybody already, my peers are already way past this, but they're really, nobody's ever passed it. I remember one time I was literally crying to a guitar star. The guy was from Naples. He was a wonderful guitarist, Marco Cappelli. And I was really crying. I'm like, I feel like I can't get it. I'm always starting at one. I'm always going back to I still doing basic stuff. And we were in one of those studios in New York City, the underground. You're in they're in the basement. It was a whole chain of studios, and all these people are renting space. And the woman next to us was a famous cellist, right? And she gets in there and and she's just doing scales and tuning up her instrument and stretching her hands. And he goes, do you hear her? She's starting at one. You're going to start at one every day. just deal with it. That's the way it is. And that really put things in perspective. So it's, even though I know I have so much to learn still, and I hope I always have things to learn because that makes it fun. You always, it's like, just accept, you have to go back to one. You have to do stupid things, and a lot of, a good portion of my day, not a good portion, but I got to spend I have to spend time every day, like just doing basic scales to get your voice to it and then train your voice. And then you go into the singing and then, or listening. A lot of what we do is listening. We just have to listen. We listen, you're learning a song or you're studying a genre or something. You have to a lot of it's just sitting there listening. So it's nice that I get to share the stories, because then I feel like that my work, the work I'm doing, is not just all consuming my time and that's it. So if I can, if I can make that part of the music and part of the put a message into it and bring people in with that, then it also feels like, okay, I don't mind. So, and I think of that too, like something when I'm sitting there, I'm just warming up my voice and I'm doing another exercise, I want to work on this at my voice. I'm going to do this exercise. And it sounds stupid when you hear them, like, why are they vocalizing like that? But, I think of that. I think, well, this allows me to get up and sing this song and then I can tell this story. So, you kind of have to keep it in perspective,
So what instruments do you play? I know you play the drum or
I play the drum. The drum the drum I wasn't even going to play so much, but because it's such a big part of the tradition, and I credit the musicians I worked with through the years, mostly men, that said, Michaela, you need to pick up the drum more. You need to play the drum more. You need to play the drum more. I mess around on the guitar. I'm not a good guitarist, and I really haven't learned, and I haven't studied as much on it, but I play around with it to help me learn songs or to write songs. And I'm trying to learn how to play the ukulele.
Okay.
Because it's so much easier for me to hold the ukulele than a guitar. And a friend of mine that I work with, he wants me to start using it on stage. And I don't feel like I can get up and hold the drum. I have no problem on stage with the drum. I'm okay with it. But I don't feel confident enough yet to pick up a guitar or a ukulele. I'm like, no, I'm not there yet. And I work with these great guitarists, like the best of the best. I always did. Or like a guy that I work with these accordion players that are like virtuosi. Like, you don't need me. Just let me sing. You guys do. So we'll see. Eventually I'll get there. But I have this other instrument. I wish I had pulled it out. Maybe, I don't know, at the end I'll pull it out or something. It's in the other room. When I moved down to Memphis, a good friend of mine, Michael Delia, and we used to have a trio together. He was we had a band together. He's a sculptor and a musician and an instrument maker. So he had been promising he was going to make me, he wanted to make me a lyre, like those old ancient, bing, 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 those harp kind of things that people wanted to make one of them for years. And he made me one for when I moved down to Memphis, and it's the lyre and it's got a drum on the bottom. So it's like the only thing in the world that exists like this. So I'm trying, and he put the way he put the chords on it, it's in a blues scale. He goes, you're moving to Memphis, you got to play the blues now. So I'm trying to figure out how to use this instrument. I'm still playing around on it. A year and a half later, I'm still trying to figure out what to do with it. It's so dramatic. It's such a dramatic. And I was all excited. I was supposed to do a show up north last year, and I had it with me, and I had it with me the whole tour. It's in this big container. It's in this big. He made the case for it, and I was so excited. I was going to finally get to unveil this instrument. And the event on tour, I get a phone call. The event got canceled because there was this freak leak in the building, and it ruined the theater. And I was like,
oh no.
So I still haven't used this instrument.
Oh no.
So I'm trying to figure out how to put that
You were psyching yourself up, and then you couldn't even play it.
I was so excited. I worked out that it was a great song. I worked out it worked out beautifully with this instrument. I worked out the percussion, and I was like, son of a gun. Like sometimes, you plan and plan. And boy, things just like what are the odds that the ceiling would cave in 3 days before I'm supposed to be there?
So the music that you perform, is it usually, right, exactly. The music that you perform, is it usually like traditional music, or is it something that you've written, or is it a combination? How does your music work?
It's a little bit of everything. Like I've been working for all these years with traditional songs, and songs that are, we call them folk songs, songs that are typically passed down through generations. And I just love it. I just love collecting songs and figuring out ways to sing them. And sometimes I try to keep a song as traditional as that I'm aware that it is, because we only have limited amounts of understanding how a song is actually traditional. But most of the time I rearrange it, keeping the melody so it's a little bit recognizable, but I'll add something to it, or we'll add, I had a trio for a number of years. We had a world music sound. So we worked with a lot of instruments from other traditions, and that would change the sound of the songs, which was really cool. And right now, what I'm doing here in Memphis is I'm working with some Memphis musicians, and we are adding like a Memphis sound, we add like American musical tradition, especially American traditions that are identified with the South, like maybe some country sound, maybe some country swing, maybe some blues, maybe some rockabilly, adding to these songs. Because what started happening is, like I said, I tell stories, and music is a way of understanding the traditions of a people. It's a way of understanding the soul of a people, because you're not just talking about, let's say, folklore, or folklore is actually, it's the everyday life of people. So you're understanding a people through these songs and through their stories. And you're understanding a history. You can start to understand the way people were thinking, But what happened, the audiences started saying to me, okay, this is great. Like, now what happened next?
Right.
And they started saying, what happened when they got to the United States? Like, what happened next? Like we like little kid, like, finish the story. Yeah. So I started adding, little by little, like maybe a lot of song that's in English, and it's was written by a Sicilian immigrant or a Calabrese, maybe, and they don't know, like, really, like, one of my favorite things that I'm in Tennessee, and it's a song that I always love, is the song Rocky Top. Rocky Top's a big deal because it's about Tennessee. Well, Rocky Top was written by Felice and Boudleaux Bryant, who wrote a lot of songs for the Everly Brothers. They wrote songs for Buddy Holly. They're one of probably the most famous songwriting couple in the United States ever. Well, Felice Bryant was actually baptized Genevieve Matilde Scaduto. She was Sicilian American. So I love to tell about this. The most famous happy song in Tennessee is actually country, and it's considered a country music song. It's not even a folk song from tradition. It was written by a Sicilian American girl. So I love that. I love to do that. And the audiences really get a kick out of it. So now I'm kind of forced. It's funny because I'm like forced to sing in English, right? And the first time I ever really like professionally sang in English, I was in Italy. They asked me to sing in English in Italy, which was really hysterical. And I had to sing a rock and roll song, but it was based on a folk song. So it's like I'm constantly like circling through. It's like spiraling, right? So that's where I am with the music. So and sometimes like I started, like, I've been writing, and it's like I know a lot of professional writers are like, they're like, oh, it's too personal. I can't put my poetry out there, but I'll write a novel, So it's a confidence thing. And it's also like, where's my sound kind of thing. So I do write songs. I started to write some songs like in a traditional style. So they're folk songs, but they're, I wrote them, they're based on tradition. They're inspired by, but I wrote them. And I'm like, well, it's the next progression, because I've been kind of like when you're rearranging a song, you're kind of like rewriting it, if you will. So there's that. And this is the next progression. I'll just put new lyrics, or now like change the lyrics or change the melody kind of.
Can you give us an example of like how you change a song? Like, can you do like an a cappella version of like the traditional, and then maybe like how you changed it a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. The song, the Kumari Nina, and Kumari are the midwives. So that was a big tradition in Sicily and southern Italy. And midwives are special because midwives, in tradition, and even here in the U.S., I believe the midwives have the same characterization. Midwife has physical knowledge. A midwife has day-to-day physical knowledge, how to do things, but she also has esoteric knowledge. She's also a healer. There's a spiritual realm involved. So in this song, it's Kumari Ninu. And typically it would be like a very sing-songy, like it was a little, a filastrocca, a nursery rhyme. But what we do is we make it a little bit more rhythmic. So we would add like a tarantella rhythm to it. So instead of being like, let's see, like, I'm trying to how you would sing it for like, Kumari Nina, Kumari Vicenza, Mettiti Valenza, che nasce bebè. Kumari Nina, Kumari Vicenza, Mettiti Valenza, che nasce bebè. La 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 la. That was how you probably sing it, but we do it this way.
So it's less of a lullaby.
Have breaks in there that would be like, yeah. I did that too with and I was doing that with this one. I had a friend of mine in Naples who did that with a lullaby, and he took the lullaby and he put a tamburiata rhythm to it. So the lullaby, that would be it's a beauty, and I've recorded it, which is really cool. So that also showed me, like, you know, I'm not the only one doing this. There's other people around the world doing this. And a lullaby, you know, would be Quando Sant'Anna dormeva Maria. I'm not even in the right tune. I'm sorry. Quando canzone bella che le diceva. Well, he showed me to make it sound like this. Quando Sant'Anna dormeva Maria. So it livens it up a little bit. And sometimes we take a song. We did a song too for like Tira Murieddu, and it's a very melodic, rhythmic song, like plotting. And sometimes what we'll do is we'll start out that way, just to get people to understand, like, this is what it was, but now we're going to make it this, and then we make it something they can maybe dance to, which is a lot of fun. And sometimes you want to slow down a song too. There's a song, Mi voto mi rivoto, which is a beautiful love song from Sicily. And it's typically done in a 3/4 rhythm. And sometimes people make it almost like a march, like, you know, dun, 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 da, 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 dee, da. I like to slow it down and make it much more romantic. And I make it a ballad. I turn it into a ballad. So there's that, sometimes that aspect too. And I like to make it a little bit more dramatic. It's kind of like, what is the song saying to me? And what's the message I want to give to the audience? And in some of this stuff too, it's the feel from that's why I love live music, because there's a feedback I get from the audience. So sometimes I'm like, you know what? This is the crowd pleaser. We're going to do it this way for the rest of our lives, because the audiences everywhere love it. And sometimes the audiences don't. And you're like, you know what? It's better if we do it this way. We got a better response. So let's do it this way. They kind of tell us, which I love that. Yeah. You know, it's I don't know if audiences realize that in this kind of music, you know, your reaction is what's going to change this song. You know, and sometimes we'll change it. You know, we'll realize too, like, you know what? They don't want us to stop. Let's just keep going. They love this. Let's just keep going. Let's stretch it out. And so a 2-minute song, like, we got to make that song. We got to always add a couple other verses because they love this song. So that's kind of the stuff we do.
So what are some of the stories that you tell on stage prior to the songs? I would love to hear some of the storytelling.
Well, like I was just talking about, like, the midwives. I'm happy to talk about, you know, I say we have a song about midwives, and I'll tell, you know, I'll talk about, like, the lyrics of the song. Like in that particular song, we say, you know, go get the midwives because the baby's coming. Go run and get this midwife and that midwife. And we say, if it's a little boy, we're going to send him to school. If it's a little girl, we're just going to have her do stuff at home. We're going to teach you how to do things to run a household. You know, so think about it. Like, it shows you how,
your mindset
200 years ago, how things were split, right? You know, you didn't send your daughter to school because she had to learn how to run a household. So we tell you, little things at home. Well, what was that? She's baking bread. She's sewing all the clothes. She's weaving the fabric. She's, you know, taking care of this. You know, one of the things I like when I do that song about the other one I was talking about, my friend in Naples taught me the lullaby. It's called the Ninna Nanna di Sant'Anna. And it's the lullaby of Saint Anne. So Saint Anne is telling her little girl, she's saying, you sleep now because you're going to be someday the mother of our Savior. And I love to tell you, so even baby Jesus had a nonna, even baby Jesus had a grandma, and they, wait a minute. Let's think about that. And you see their heads explode, like, wait a second. But there's a lot of history in these songs. So I like to talk about that too. Like, there's a song I sing, and I'm happy to send you, I have a recording of it. It's Usheku. And Usheku is actually the song part of it. The melody was written by friends of mine in Milan. They're actually Sicilians that moved up to Milan. Rocco Polin and his band Mondorchestra. But it comes from a poem from 1848. So I talked about it. And they say, 1848, there was this, the bread uprising in Palermo. It was the peasants, the contadini, were starving. And they said, we need to eat. So this is why they started revolting. And this is a metaphor. It's a song about a donkey. And it's a metaphor for the peasant, because in this song, the donkey's carrying bread and I explain the lyrics, the donkey's carrying bread for his boss. And he said, please feed me. And the boss says, I'm not going to feed you. You're just a donkey. And even if I feed you, you're still going to be starving. So the donkey throws himself down on the ground and he cries out, Usazio un criri all'udiuno, which means the one who has enough to eat never understands the one who is starving. So when I explain this song, people get not only a history lesson, but they also get, a language lesson. They get, they're learning about the metaphor and how even back then people understood just basic humanity. Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. When you got it going, are you paying attention to the guy that doesn't have it going? Are you aware? How do you expect, you need to understand just because they're not having the same experience as you need to understand that person. And sometimes it's a lot of fun. Sometimes it's and I don't necessarily always, sometimes there's darkness involved in these, but I don't necessarily dwell on that. For example, I sing a few songs about La Fuitina, and La Fuitina is eloping. And I talk about the song. If the song has that element, I said it's about La Fuitina. I said that's when you marry who you want, not who your parents picked for you. And there's a reason they picked. There's a reason. That was survival, pretty much just survival. That's why you picked a marriage. So the happy part of this tradition, and I try to dwell on the positive part of it. The happy part of it is that these people went off and they picked who they wanted to. And they went off, and that's what this song is about. Like, we're going to do this anyway, in spite of what your parents say. There was a dark side to that tradition too. There was the kidnapping and the raping. It's called the same thing, but there was one that the kids chose to do, and the other one, it was against their will. So typically, I dwell on the positive aspects. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you have to mention that there's a little bit of a negative aspect depending on the song. But I think it's, I can leave that up to the scholars. I'm not negating it. I'm not denying that existed. I'm just promoting one aspect of it, kind of thing. But every song has a little story, and I like to explain everything, especially when we do the songs for Christmas and stuff like that. Sometimes I add my family's history into it because people really relate to that. There's a song that's on my Christmas album called O Sanctissima. And I have such a history with this song. When I first started singing Sicilian music, I tell the audiences, when I first started singing Sicilian music, my mother used to say, you should sing O Sanctissima. And I was like, why should I say? She said, because it's a Sicilian song. And I said, well, I don't know that it's a Sicilian song, Mom. It's a church song and it's in Latin. Like, why? She says, well, your grandmother sang it. And your grandmother was from Palermo. And I'm like, I don't think that's how we do this. I don't think that's how we qualify. But just because grandma sang it and she was Sicilian, I don't think so. But she would insist on it. And in books, like if you look this song up, they identify it as the Sicilian Mariners Hymn.
Interesting.
I don't know why. And I have the honor of knowing a wonderful ethnomusicologist from Sicily. He's probably the most prolific and greatest alive today. I have to say that. I'm in awe. This is Sergio Bonanzina. And I ask him all the time, Sergio, please tell me, where can I find information about this song? He goes, it's not Sicilian. He goes, just somebody in a book said something because it was probably identified with Southern. And he goes, we have no record of this song. Like, it has to. I mean, it had to come from somewhere that they're identifying this as. So it's a song that it's identified as coming from Sicily. It's identified with November 6th, the Feast of St. Nicholas, because it's identified with Sicilian mariners. The idea is they used to put a statue of the Madonna on the sea to honor her on that day. And St. Nicholas is the patron of mariners in southern Italy. And somehow this song worked its way to Germany, and it became a church song, a little motet. And then from Germany, it worked its way to the U.S. And here's where it gets really crazy. O Sanctissima. Here in the U.S., because it was coming as like a German hymn, like a hymn from Germany, but it was in Latin. It was became part of the army band songs. And somewhere from the army bands, it went from north to south, somewhere in the Civil War. And it eventually became the melodic basis for the song We Shall Overcome.
Oh, wow.
Is that wild? Is that wild? So when you put the two melodies together, there's a part of We Shall Overcome that's like exactly from O Sanctissima. Not the entire song, but it's the basis. It's the beginning of and that's the theory, that's how this song traveled. So what we did is on my album, like the last verse is We Shall Overcome.
Oh, wow. How neat.
And I love to talk to that about it, Yeah, like how it's history, but it's in my family history too. And it's part of my American history. It's not just my Sicilian history. It's not just my personal history. We all share this history.
I'd love to include that on our website if we can, if you have
Yeah, and I'm happy to send you, because it's in my liner notes, the whole story. So I can send you that too, and I'll send you a recording of it. And here's something, this is personal. I don't know, do you have time for like a personal story? Okay. When my daughter was little, I was sitting in the bleachers at some event at school. You know how the moms all sit there and talk. And I was talking to this one mother, and I found out that she was Italian. And I didn't know, because her last name was Irish, her husband was Irish, the kids were little. She's my maiden name is, and she was talking to me. She was fascinated that I do this, and she was really into studying her, researching her family tree. That was the thing she did. So I had just been researching We Shall Overcome, and I had. I want to make sure I got the name right for the woman I'm about to bring her name. And one of the things with We Shall Overcome, that sometimes when you look up the story of it, it talks about the civil rights activist who was an Italian American. Her name is Viola Liuzzo. Mm-hmm. And the thing, why We Shall Overcome is identified, she was actually killed because of her civil rights work. And she was assassinated while she was in her car, and she was singing We Shall Overcome when she was assassinated. So I had just been researching this, and at the time I used to have a blog for a millisecond, and I had just written an essay on this. And my friends telling me about how she's researching her, and she goes, in fact, one of my ancestors, one of my relatives was a civil rights activist, Viola Liuzzo. And I went, are you kidding me? I said, I was just researching her. I said, I just wrote about her. Are you kidding me? And to meet somebody, she's like, yeah, that was, it was my aunt or whatever. I was like, holy smokes, like how we're all so connected.
It's pretty amazing.
So it was so these stories keep going and going and going. And so that's just some of the stories I tell. But every song, I try to tell a story about every song like in the beginning, I used to think, oh, I'm just talking too much. And you go to other concerts and people just play music, and they, and I don't want to see that. I don't like to see that at a show either. I want to hear something from the performer. But I was always afraid that I was talking too much. And when I try to cut it down, my musician's like, no, come on, tell the story. It's really, you got to hear the story. It's really cool. Tell the story. So I try to, I'm trying to find that balance. I don't want to bore anybody, but audiences want to hear that too. And it almost, I feel like when I tell the stories and the folklore behind these songs, I feel like that makes a belonging. It kind of makes people understand the audience that, you know what, this is our shared humanity. This song belongs to you. It's not just a song from another tradition, or it's not just a song from your tradition, or it's not just a song from a tradition you don't know, you because of your name that it's party, but you don't know anything about it. Now it becomes part of them. Now it becomes part of their shared humanity.
Yeah, human history.
So I'm trying to always find that balance. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's something too. Like we don't realize how much we do share, how much is connected. And, it's interesting to me to be able to bring that.
And what does your audience look like? Like who is your audience? Is it primarily like Italians and Sicilians, or is it very?
I wish it were. I'm in that way. I know. I'm shocked. I have to tell you, I'm delighted. This summer I have a lot of Italian festivals, and this is exciting. This is like everything I dreamed of. But I don't always get Italian festivals. They don't want my music. They're like, nah, we'll get like a doo-wop band. We'll get rock. We'll get like country rock. we'll get like hard rock because they don't know it. They don't, and people don't like, what is that? It's like, it's Italian music. That's what it is. It's your tradition. It's, it's festival music, tarantella, fazola, people are dancing. So I have like all these Italian festivals this year. And I'm like, yay. And I feel bad because like even, a guy with an Italian band, he's rearranging folk music with jazz. It's beautiful. These are talented musicians. And he was talking to me. He's like, I really want to do this. Do you think, is there like a circuit we could? I'm like, no. And no, there's no circuit. Like you just got to keep knocking on doors and they find you, and you make the circuit kind of thing. And I felt bad because like I couldn't give him any kind of like guidance or advice. Just keep going. Just keep putting your music out there, and you'll find your audience will find you, kind of thing. So my audience is made up of a lot of different people. Yes, there are Sicilian Americans in my audience. Yes, there are Italian Americans. I get a lot of, because my music is also considered world music. So I get the people that like ethnic music. They like world music. People that are into folk music. Because this is considered folk music and there's that element of folk, I play a lot of places that are known for bluegrass. So I might have bluegrass fans in my audience. And I have to tell you, like, I have to say the audience for me that has been the most consistent through the years is the folk music people, because they just are typically, if they're not professional musicians, they're amateur musicians, and they love music and they love tradition. So they're always the first ones that are coming to the shows. So, and when I'm trying to like get a gig, like I try to tell the organizer, like, I'm really marketable because my music's good for everybody. Like, there's an element for everybody in this music, but they don't always see that, So it's like, you're kind of like, okay, let me explain it to you. Let me tell you how it is. So that's my audience. And it's fun in that, I'm always happy to have I love having an Italian audience, but I don't always have an Italian audience. And it's weird because like when I go to Italy, same thing. Like when I go to Italy, it's not always Sicilians in my audience, but in Italy, they just want to hear music. Yeah. Like they don't care that, well, I'm from Vico Pisano by Pisa, and she's making song. I'm going to go see her. It's like, oh, cool. Let's go see it. It sounds really cool. That's their attitude. Like, it's music. Yay. It's really cool what she's doing. Yay. She's got these really great musicians. Yay. Look at how she's singing. Yay. So it's a different attitude. Like here, everything has to be like, okay, like, what do you do? Do you fit with our programming? Because we can't market you if you don't. And I get it. Like, it's so hard to make money here that, not that they're making money in Italy. They don't care. They're like used to not making money. That's the difference. They're like, you're not going to make money. Don't worry about it. And that's, it's funny too, because like another difference, like in Italy, wherever you go, whatever gig you have, they feed you and they give you great wine. And like here, like you always have to make sure we're going to get fed, right? Like dinner is included, like, right. And my musician, this guy that I work with, he's from Cremona, Fabio Turchetti, you'll hear him on a couple of my albums. He's like indignant, like, if they don't give you food in Italy, like it doesn't matter if they don't pay you, but if they don't feed you and give you wine, like we'll burn the place down. Like that's how we'll respond. Like it's an offense. Right. Like it's an offense if they don't don't worry about getting paid because you're not gonna get paid. So that's the difference, But here, like, because here, the stakes are higher in the sense that if you're at a venue, like they have to fill that venue. It's not like, so I'm trying to encourage, musicians create things too that are not necessarily in venues, like make a venue happen. Mm-hmm. That's why I'm a big fan of house concerts, backyard concerts, front porch concerts, church basements, can't beat a church basement, rec centers. Make music anywhere, art galleries, wherever you can make music, make music. If there's a musician listening, just don't worry about, you always have to try to get the gig and try to go to those important venues and, sell yourself to them and that kind of thing and get that feather in your cap. But boy, if you can make music, you can get an audience anywhere and your audience will come and people want to hear. And I think it's important that we get to that because, and this has been coming up a lot lately in my work, we're losing the connection. We're losing this folklore. We're losing the human connection. This, as miraculous as this is, it's also very isolating and we're losing the live audience. And for musicians, we all need to get on the stick and start creating opportunities for music and take it to young people. Mm-hmm. Children and adolescents and college age need to understand the the feeling of a shared experience of live music, what it's like to enjoy music in a community. And they need to start hearing those sounds of live music. And it's, I see it a lot that, they don't want to come out and hear a new band because, they got the classic on, they can hear, the definitive music in that genre. They can hear it on their phone or from iTunes. But the reality is, like, how does it ever evolve? How does it ever change? How do you ever hear the next greatest person? Right. You're missing out on a lot of great people by not coming to live. So we need to train our younger generations for live music. We need to train that and make it available. Put music everywhere. Any kind of event, have music, but make it a focal point. Don't make it just in the background. That's a problem too. It's not a background. It should be something. And I think part of that could also be that a lot of modern music is very passive. It's a very passive experience. What I try to do with this music is remind people, not just what I'm telling them, but with the experience. This is communal music. This is music that's meant to be enjoyed, not just listening to it, but we want you clapping your hands. We want you sometimes to sing along with us. And if you want to get up and dance, well, we'll make a space for you, because that's where this music comes from. It comes from a shared community. It wasn't music made, just for me alone. And I'm going to sit behind my computer. Right. And if anybody finds it, this was music that was made with your whoever you were living with was it your family, the people in your neighborhood, the people in your town, the people in your province. And it was shared that way. It was enjoyed that way. So I try to create that. I always like when I used to do shows, when I used to create my own shows in New York and set them up and, get the venue together and, promote it and stuff. I always wanted to create the idea that it's like a party in the piazza. Yeah. This is where you're coming together, and this is how, and even just the way we would set up the chairs sometimes. I didn't we didn't necessarily set up the chairs in rows. We'd set them up so they could get up and dance in the middle, or so there was a space for them. We would try to have like an element of food. So, what's a celebration without food? But we wanted to do something where they were participating. And I'll tell you something. I sing a song about the fava bean. There's a Sicilian song about the fava bean. And the tradition on this song is there's little movements, because it's really cute. It's a song that's typically, the tradition is it comes from Carnevale, that when we're all, having fun and celebrating. So it's a lively song. And it's just a song about the little farmer. He plants the fava bean. So he plants it, then the fava bean grows, then he harvests it, he peels it, he cooks it, he eats it, and at the end, he eliminates it. It's cute. Yeah. It's a cute song. It's not funny. It's not vulgar. It's just cute. But there's little actions for everything, Right. He plants it, he cooks it, he eats it, and it's cute. And when we were doing the song, if we do it like around St. Joseph's Day, because I used to do a concert always in the springtime. I haven't set that up here in Memphis yet. I have to. Maybe this year, 24, I'll set it up. But we always do like an annual spring. Let's just, because, winter in New York was horrible. It was icy. It was dark. You had 5-6 months of dark and cold and ice. So finally spring, yay, let's celebrate. We could call it Sicilian dance party for the spring.
Oh, that's beautiful.
And the tradition for around springtime, St. Joseph's Day, March 19th, one of the traditions is you eat fava beans. Fava beans are part of that whole St. Joseph's altar, and you make things out of fava. It's also the season. But the idea of a fava bean is supposed to be good luck.
Oh, okay.
And there's a tradition that if you take a dry fava bean, and you keep it in your wallet, you will always, your purse, your coin purse, whatever, you will always have a little bit of money. You have money all year. Uh-huh. So the first time we started doing this, we used to give out fava beans at the show. If we talk about the concept of fava beans, saying, by the way, fava beans, good luck. We tell the story, what it meant. It was for Carnevale. And by the way, fava beans, good luck. And I would have a basket of fava beans. And people would come up. We just hand them out from the stage. And people would come up and they would get so excited. Now, I'm giving away a fava bean. Okay. I used to buy Goya makes a bag, it's a bag of 16 ounces. They used before pre-COVID, that stuff was like $1.99 for a pound of fava beans, right? So I don't know how many I'm getting. I don't know what it's costing. And the band would start, they were giving them out, and the audience would come up. And I remember one time, everybody would come up, they'd have this look on their face, like, this is great. They're so happy. One of my friends came up, and she was getting one. She's so excited. She was so excited. And I'm thinking, this woman lives on Park Avenue in New York City. She's got a penthouse on Park Avenue. She's got more money than God. And she's so excited to be getting this little fava bean because it's good luck and it's part of this tradition.
Yeah.
And so it's like, you know what? It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter. We all share this and it's beautiful. So that's how like these songs all tie into like to daily life, to folklore, and to participation. So everybody, you know, I don't know where these people are today, but I'm sure there's like a whole bunch of people all over the East Coast that have fava beans because they're coming to my shows, you know, and good. And it's just nice to be part of that. And just even talking about it, I feel so good. Yeah. And I want to create that. And music, I just feel that as if you're a performer, especially music, you have a duty to uplift. Because I feel that, you know, when you're performing, when you're making music, you're tapping into something that's supernatural. You're tapping into something that's much bigger than just 8 little notes. It's much bigger than just me wanting to make a song and I like it because it sounds pretty when I sing this way. I like this message. It's much, much bigger. And I think we have a responsibility. Which way do you want to go? Do you want to uplift people or do you want to drag them down? And even if it's just, you know, making them feel good for that night, well, they're going to carry that with them. And I think that's important. I think, you know, we get so many messages and we're tearing each other down so much. And I think just like, let's just, you know, let's just raise everybody up. And one way to do that is to, and, you know, one way to ennoble people is give them music that really elevates their soul. I'm not, you know, I don't feel the need to, you know, hammer home. I don't have an agenda. I don't think that's right. Because I think right there, you're already intentionally starting. I want to eliminate people. I don't want to eliminate anybody. I want everybody to be connected and I want everybody to feel good. And that's how I think that's one of the ways we can do that is through the music is, you know, how do you uplift, you know, and make that choice? Because really what we do, making music, it comes from religious ritual. That's where this all started. Yeah. You know, in antiquity, this was a way that we connected to the supernatural. And then through the centuries, through the millennia, we understood that, well, you know, there's a secular part of this too. But I still feel that there is something that's ancient that connects us. And I think that's that's something that drives us. And I think that's an energy that we still have. And I think we have a responsibility as to get up on stage. People are giving you their time and their attention. So I think we have, what are we going to do with that time and attention? What am I going to give back to them? And that colors what I do.
That's just beautiful.
It's my, you know, thank you. It's, I don't know if I'm making any difference, but like I said, there's a bunch of people somewhere on the planet with those little fava beans in their purse and they're happy. So
I think it is. I think what you're doing is making a difference. And I think it's wonderful. Thanks for sharing it with us. I really appreciate you coming on the show.
Oh, my pleasure.
This has been so wonderful, just inspiring me to bring on way more musicians. So if you have more musicians.
Well, I'm happy to hook you up with a lot of musicians. I'm happy to, I'll send you names. They all love to talk. So.
Fantastic. Well, thanks so much. And thank you, Folklore Chiquitos, for joining us today on this folky musical ride today. And like I said, I'm hoping to continue this musical ride, and we'll put up all the links to everything that Michaela talked about on our website, including the project that you're working with the Tennessee Folklife Center. That sounds really great. When will that come out? Do you know? When will your project?
I don't know what that's even going to be. Like I said, I signed up for this thing. I have no idea where it's going. I'm in the process now of collecting the data, and I'm starting to ask for interviews. So I want to get some really cool people to give me some interviews. And it's nice for me because I'm getting to learn the Italian American community. I'm getting to know the Italian American community down here. And it's interesting too, because we have a big connection to Louisiana, believe it or not. Memphis and New Orleans have a strong connection. So that figures into. So I'm just at the beginning stage of this. So you're going to be hearing about this a lot in the next coming months. So like I said, I have no idea what I signed up for.
Well, we'll put up the link for the Tennessee Folklife Center anyways and see what comes up from it. But if you, listeners, if you know someone you would like me to interview, please give me a shout out. We have a Facebook group just for that so that you can interact with us and you can talk about what you liked about the show and questions that you might have that we didn't answer. And or even if you have thoughts that you want to share, if you have a story, please share your stories with us, because that's what this podcast is about. We want to be sharing our stories with one another, because it's all about interconnecting our humanness with one another. And so, as always, please comment, subscribe, give us all the stars on iTunes, give us a review, because that's how other people find this podcast. That's how we are discovered. And so, if you are looking to share it with someone, next time you're at your local football game, make a homemade sign that says, "Listen to Fabric of Folklore. You'll thank me later." And and they might think you're crazy, but you know what? Maybe it'll bring in one or two listeners. So thanks, everyone, for unraveling the mysteries of folklore on Fabric of Folklore. I'm your host, Vanessa Y. Rogers, and until next time, keep the folk alive.